Yeah, I can see you.
I can hear you.
Hey, nice to see you. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I'm hanging in there.
So now we had quite a fuzz with all those technical stuff we were
Yes.
doing. So I'm a little how you say, excited on one way, and a little it feels a little strange. But why don't we just try to play a little bit before we start chatting about the music? Would that
That
be
sounds
okay?
good.
Okay, let's try it.
Yes.
Ooh. That's weird, but it seems like you can hear me.
I can hear you now.
Okay, that's
Yes,
very
I'm
good.
not just. I can hear you, but I can also hear myself with an echo, which makes it all pretty interesting.
So this is very strange, kind of exploring this virtual environment in this situation. I mean, like being not only testing it at home, but just being live on air with that. But it still felt good to play again with you. We did meet before and played before. I think 2 years ago was in Hagen, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right. And
yeah.
we played a
Well,
few times in Germany, in Mers too, I suppose.
yeah,
Right?
that's true. Yeah, that's much more years ago. There were some things I was about to ask when I like prepared for this session today. I listened to some of your music, and there are so many questions I actually also ask myself, but still I feel like asking you tonight. Um, like when we play together like this, we improvise. Obviously, we improvise. I would say open. I don't like the word free so much because maybe we can come to that later. But where do the sounds come from? I mean, how do we make these decisions? What would you say? How do you pick the things you want to do?
While improvising?
Yes.
It's a good question. I suppose. Oh God, I hear so much echo. I suppose that it's a mix between a very fast reaction and your own imagination, in a way. Like, I guess if you wanted to analyze it, there might be strategies, or there might be ways of like, okay, now I might be wanting to mimic your sound or blend your sound, and there might be other times where I'm deciding to add something that, to add another layer, or maybe have 2 or 3 different strains that I'm connecting while I'm still really listening to you. There might be times where I choose to ignore you. Sorry.
No. I'm perfectly with you. I understand. No, sure. No, it's just what I'm looking at, or also what I'm looking at when I play myself is how do we come up with these things? Because of course we prepare a lot of things we practice. We like have a library of sounds we might use, but then still in specific environments like today, you in New York, me here with all those weird echo stuff and technical problems, we still kind of start picking these things, and this is kind of interesting to me. And I was also listening to your music. For example, when I listened to the Sleep Thief record from the Madness of Crowds record, this is so specific, like as if because you're also improvising freely, right?
Yes.
On that record. So, but still, it feels so specific. It feels like there's choices of things you would only do in this environment. You would not do maybe I don't know, but when I hear it, it kind of feels like that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think like on that particular record, for example, I used to play a lot of standards, or like explore standards with Liam and with Liam Noble, the pianist on the record. And with Tom Rainey, I mean, I obviously have played in many different combinations, sometimes highly written music, sometimes freely improvised music. So we have we have a lot of different backgrounds that will inform how we improvise with each other for sure. I know that Liam, just like I myself as well, is a Bach fan, so there's a certain harmonic side to the improvised, and has a fantastically interesting harmony, I think, and he's a kind of a counterpunchal sort of player, so that I know there'll be a lot of harmonic information coming at me that I don't want to, that I want to do justice. Yeah, so I guess like every different player will hopefully force a different reaction in a way.
I mean, that's for sure. That's the individual part. But what I was getting at was more, and that's interesting because you mentioned the Bach, or the coming from the European concert music side, the inputs. What I was going at was this non-idiomatic kind of looking to not go into this is jazz, or this is this, or this is this, but like try to be in all the music that's possibly at this moment. So this is not a question. I was just
okay.
I was just thinking about this. Because then again, when I listen to other bands of yours, it seems like you choose, as a band leader, you choose bands to give you a special environment to do special things, because you sound so different, and many things are like when the Utuba band is a good example, because it's so different from the Sleep Thief, of course.
Yes.
So
no, that's definitely true. I definitely pick players, and I imagine the music with those players in mind. Have a sort of, except for the like really large scale orchestra pieces, I have always done that. I've written music specifically for groups. And with Ubatuba, for example, it's for those people who don't know, it's alto saxophone, Tim Byrne, Ben Gerstein on trombone, Dan Peck on tuba, and Tom Rainey on drums, and myself. So it's a bunch of horns and drums. And I decided to write the music completely different to the way I usually write. Like I typically start writing at the piano. In this case, it didn't make any sense to me, so I wrote much more linear music, either on the saxophone or in my head, and it was a different approach. But I always bear the improviser's kind of voices in mind, you know.
That's a strange thing as a composer. I mean, I'm not so much. I don't write so much music, but as a composer, to incorporate improvisation is it's this hybrid kind of structure. So in some things you make clear, you declare this is what I want, and on the other side you leave open space. And then for the players, it's like being in the environment, but also fighting the things in a way to get some sort of freedom, even though I don't like the word. But it's a weird situation as a player and as a composer, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think as you mentioned, I do pick people who are actually really who are also into that, are interested in that, and they don't feel threatened by written parts or annoyed, or they don't feel like I'm being hierarchical and I'm sort of like bossing them around. They're happy to do it. And they're also great improvisers. Like Chris Davis, who was an artist of the Monheim Triennale. She's like a perfect example, She'll do the same thing to me. She'll write something that I then have to happily deal with, because it's a challenge I like. I do like learning other people's music. I just love playing and practicing original music, basically.
It's interesting. Chris, of course, is the player we have in the tableau of 16. Mm-hmm. You are in all her projects when we have the Triennale next year then. And I did some shows is not the right word, but I tried to introduce the music of the Triennale in Monheim. So I played music in pubs and played and talked and stuff. So I had played Chris Davis music, and there was two things. One was that she said in one interview, she said, I had to learn how the music is played first, and then I had to make my own voice. So this goes again to this idiom. There's a certain idiom where she comes from and what she expands in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I also think, I've learned many different styles, or like I've at least looked into many different types of music coming up. And I don't think any of it is wasted, even if you end up not playing a lot of it, like it'll inform something, or it will have taught you something that you can use, so it's a big palette, but you might not need to choose every single color.
Yeah, sure. No, of course, nothing is way. It's just I'm looking for this. Where are we standing? Which tradition lines are crossing, and where? Mm-hmm. Because then when I introduce Chris' music, and that brings me to the next thing. Then later, I had the feeling that she has a relation to the second Viennese, the school of second. What is it in German? It's Zweite Wiener Schule. So the people like mm-hmm. Berg and Schönberg. And
yeah, things. I'm sure she
so
does.
Then I took a piece of this and put it behind and played it. So I played Chris Davis, Capricorn Climber, actually, where you were mm-hmm. also on. And then I played Schönberg, and I said, wow, I can see that it's not only one tradition where she comes from, but it's different lines.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, the classical part is definitely... I mean, she also has a master's in classical composition, People... I do find that when you talk to people, they have quite a lot of them have all this training and these backgrounds that you wouldn't necessarily suspect if you just hear one facet of their music, or one record.
That actually brings me to the next thing. I discovered, I have to say, I know a lot of your work, but I didn't know the orchestral work. And this really blew my mind. I mean, how can you possibly? Because you don't have a Ausbildung. You didn't study classical composition or anything, right?
No.
So you just thought, well, this was something I would want to try and sit down and do that, because it's amazing pieces, both pieces on that record.
Oh, thank you. Well, it was interesting. I have a classical background as a kid. Like, I learned piano. My parents were big classical fans, so that music has been around since from very, very early age. I've heard a lot of it. I study it in terms of. I mean, I did not do formal composition studies, but I have looked at a ton of scores. I've analyzed a lot of stuff. And I always wanted to write for an orchestra, but never thought I'd have the chance to do it. And there is a course here that is run by the ACO, the American Composers Orchestra, and George Lewis, which is called the Jazz Composers Orchestra Institute. And I took part in it, and it's like a week sort of intensive in LA. And that was at the time, as I was improviser in residence in Murs. And I had a lot of time in Murs, when I wasn't being the improviser. I mean, I had the off time in my house. My husband wasn't there. My community wasn't there. So I just started writing, and then luckily had the chance to perform it a couple of times. So I was able to hone it and get rid of things I did not like, include improvisers. So in other words, when I started out writing the piece, it was a purely classical piece without improvisers, and I started morphing it and turning it more into what I think my music is.
But you had to learn all those things about instrumentation and stuff, because it feels so. I don't know. I don't find words, but I was really impressed very much when I heard it.
Well, that was actually for me really fascinating, because I didn't know anything about string writing, for example, and you guys have so much color in your instruments, right? So you don't want to just have one sound or just write the note. Classical musicians are so used to bringing the nuance out, but it's got to be written in a way. And so Ligeti was a great starting point for that, because it's there is so much information in his scores. So I learned a lot about instruments just by listening to music and studying the score.
Wow, that's really impressive. I can only recommend everybody to check out that record. It's on Impact.
Thank you.
And it's called, this is another thing, before we maybe play another piece, I wanted to ask, it's called the Contemporary Chaos Practice.
Mm-hmm.
And practices. And I also found other titles which kind of struck me. For example, the Madness of Crowds, the album with Sleep Thieves, which refers to a poet from the 19th century, I figured out.
Yeah, a book.
Right, a book, and then I thought you kind of incorporate non-musical contents also in the things you do, right? Is that true, or is it just by coincidence that these titles come along?
No, I definitely picked the titles from the book, The Madness of Crowd. It's a fascinating book, and right now the author escapes me, but it's something that's really worth reading. It's kind of a critical look at people's behavior, herd behavior, which I found fascinating. But it's I guess was written in the 19th century. It's a super famous, it's a really famous book. I just cannot.
Don't worry. I wrote it down in my sheet over there, so I don't go get it.
I feel slightly embarrassed about that.
Just the thing is, how do we transport these things in music? It's more clear on the duo record with Tom, when you have utter and flutter and murmur and things. This is much more clear because it's so you can associate so much with the music. But here, in a way, getting this information that you refer to that book changed the perception for me a little bit.
Yes,
but not obviously. So I said, I always knew there was this kind of thing.
No, because in the case of The Madness of Crowds, the titles are arbitrary, because we improvised the record and I just chose titles. I find that post-titling sometimes a little misleading. I'm not even a huge fan, but it does create a sort of an environment. But in the case of Contemporary Chaos Practices, again, it's not programmatic music, but I did have the title in mind before I composed the music. And Contemporary Chaos Practices is sort of a form of magic. There's a very loose group of, it's almost a pragmatic term for magicians who sort of can dip into different cultures and traditions. And when Trump got elected, everybody was so freaked out that there was a day, I think, where where these people put a sort of a hex on him, and I just thought it was hilarious, and I took it as a starting point.
All right. Cool. I mean, I could talk forever, but I would suggest if you feel like, even though you have this weird echo thing, obviously, if you feel like playing a little more, would that be great?
Yeah, so just the audience has to imagine that I hear about 3 saxophones at the same time.
I think they can.
With a slight delay.
Easily.
It makes me miss playing for real, this thing.
I'm here, Ingrid, really. Definitely. But there's nothing we can do. I mean, we kind of have to make the challenge and try to explore this. Oops, I'm not in the picture. To explore this environment too, right?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Achim, you still got it.
I still got what?
It.
It. Okay, we discuss that next time when we meet in Monheim then. Wow, thank you so much for being here with us. Just one more thing, I'm kind of curious, aside of the music, because we are still all in quarantine here, and we have to deal with our situation. But what we are reading about the situation in New York, it's still much worse, right?
Yeah.
So how are you holding up with all this
it's
corona shit?
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, it is rough, you know. We live close to a hospital, so we hear a lot of sirens, although we can also gauge by now that it's gotten better. Like, we literally have the sound of the sirens telling us that the numbers are getting lower in a way, you know. But there's still a lot of people dying here, and it's rough. That is rough of you know, of course, the far worse part than us being locked up here, you know. Tom Rainey, my husband, and I, we are keeping ourselves busy and maintaining in a way by playing a lot of duets. We put them up on Bandcamp for free once a week, just to kind of stay in touch with our fans, with our friends, with people who like to go to concerts, you know. And it gives us something to work on. So we're working on some written music, we're improvising, we're practicing together, you know, which is great, because it's you know, it's different than playing.
Yeah, and in a normal life we don't have the time for this, right?
Right. I mean, Tom and I, we always work on projects. Like, if we have projects that we're both in, we practice the music here before we even go to the first rehearsal, which is an absolute, like, amazing plus. But now, of course, we do this on a daily basis, so it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, there's just to say thank you one more time for being here with us, and good luck for you both and for you all. And I definitely hope to see you way before we have this festival in a little more than 1 year.
Yeah, Stay me healthy, too. We all miss playing so much.
Yeah,
and we miss hanging
as soon as possible, we pick it up again. That's for sure.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Ingrid. All the best.
Thank you, Achim.
And I talk to you later. Bye bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.